So welcome to Gloucestershire Economic Growth Joint Committee. This is the first meeting that we're holding virtually. Apologies for the slightly late start. Before I hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Patrick Molyneux, who's from Gloucestershire County Council, let me just mention who the other councillors are that are in the room. So, like I said, we've got Councillor Patrick Molyneux, who will be taking over the chairing duties shortly. We've got Councillor Tony Dale representing Councillor Joe Harris from Cotton District Council, Councillor Steve Jordan from Cheltenham Borough Council. We're waiting for Richard Leppington to join us from the Forest of Dean District Council. We have Councillor Richard Cook from Gloucester City Council, Councillor Doyna Canal from Stroud District Council, Councillor Rob Bird from Tewkesbury Borough Council, and then from the Local Enterprise Partnership, we have Dev Chakrabarti. There are a number of other officers who are present at the meeting and will be making presentations. So, Patrick, can I hand over to you as chair to take us through the start of the meeting?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, once again, I'd also like to welcome everybody to this first virtual meeting of the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Joint Committee, and welcome to everybody on YouTube. We'll start our meeting with any apologies. Have we done that? We've obviously got Tony Dale for Joe Harris, and we have Clive Howie, who's here on behalf of Pete Williams from the Forest of Dean. Are there any other apologies we need to account for?
No other apologies. Richard Leppington is hoping to join by telephone link.
Terrific. Okay, well, we'll go straight on to item number 2. And this is the minutes from the last meeting we had, which was on the 4th of February 2020. Is everybody happy with those minutes, or are there any comments, amendments we need to take on board?
I think you can take those as read, Patrick.
We'll take those as read.
Actually, no, I've got a comment actually on there, I'm afraid. Just a minor typo, but quite an important one. Item 6 on page 7, it talks about the new chair for the LEP and actually says current members of the LEP board are not allowed to submit an application. The word not shouldn't be in there.
Yes, that does change it slightly.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, everybody else happy with that? No other comments? Terrific. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, well, we'll go on to item.
Sorry, Chair, I tried the technical of raising my hand, but I was a bit. I thought I'd come in straight in. Just say, yeah, item 7, the strategic planning relating to the new role going forward. I'll take a personal interest in that.
Okay, thank you.
Terrific. Everybody else okay? No other declarations? Okay, well, we'll go on to our first item. Do we have Kevin on?
He is, yes. Councillor Kevin Cromwell, chair of the Scrutiny Committee, is in the meeting room.
Terrific. Because of the nature of the COVID pandemic and the virtual world and the new world we find ourselves in, some of the scrutiny committees have been delayed for a while. So there isn't actually a meeting of the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee set up for a few weeks yet, or for a few months, in fact. As one of the items on the agenda in particular is about the COVID crisis itself and how we're responding, we did invite members of the Scrutiny Committee to put forward questions based on the agenda or the COVID crisis to add some scrutiny to the process. We did get one set of questions from Councillor Brian Robinson. We have had a written response to that, and the question and response are all online on the Gloucester website with the agendas, so you can see them there. I just ask Kevin, though, if he has any further questions based on that or any comments based on this item. Kevin?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. Well, just to correct a little bit of what you just said there is potentially going to be a scrutiny meeting before the end of June now, because obviously we've asked for one, because obviously now you've had this meeting. I'd like to sort of wait till the end of the meeting to actually sort of ask a few questions for the committee at the end of the meeting, watching what's going to be going on, obviously, at this meeting, so that maybe we can have some questions that can go forward for the scrutiny committee's agenda when we have it before the end of the month. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Kevin. Yep, fine. We'll bring you in at the end when we do our COVID-19 response bit. We'll bring you in then, and good to hear there'll be a scrutiny meeting in the next month then. Always good to have good scrutiny. Okay, well, we move straight on to item number 5. This is a decision item, and this is governance arrangements for the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Joint Committee. Basically, I think I'll bring Gillian in to outline the decisions required and give us a bit of background on the paper. Gillian.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Chair and members. Members, you will recall back at the meeting in November, there was a discussion about the committee's decision-making process, and what this report does, it brings together 2 aspects. Firstly, a summary of the overarching governance arrangements for the committee, and secondly, it's making a recommendation regarding the committee continuing for a further 18 months from September this year, after the initial term for the committee comes to an end. I think what might be quite helpful for the committee is just to highlight some of the key aspects of the report. The first area is just to highlight around the committee's overarching powers as promoting and improving Gloucestershire's economic well-being. And there are caveats to that power, which are set out in paragraph 1.2 of the report. Members will be aware that Gloucestershire County Council is acting as the administering authority, and so involved in providing committee support, section 151 officer support, and also monitoring officer support to the committee. And the senior officer group is also an intrinsic part of the work that underpins this committee and provides recommendations regarding the work of the committee. One aspect that was raised at the committee in November concerns decision making. So just to repeat really the things that the committee need to be aware of, that decisions are taken by a majority vote of the voting members of the committee. The committee membership comprises the leader from all of the local authorities in Gloucestershire. We also have the chair of the G1 LEP and one other member from G1. They are also members of the committee, but they do not have voting powers. And as we've just heard from the chair of the Joint Scrutiny Committee, is hereby your invitation, Chair, to enable the committee to hear about the work and views of the Joint Scrutiny Committee. But again, no voting powers for the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee at this meeting. That's the overarching governance arrangements that we've highlighted in the report. The second part of the recommendation concerns the arrangements going forward from September this year. So back in 2014, all Gloucestershire Councils entered into an inter-authority agreement. And what that did was that set up the committee and how all the authorities were going to work at this committee. The agreement actually is for a 6-year term. The report refers to a 5-year term. It's actually a 6-year term, which comes to an end on the 4th of September this year. And members can see that the proposal is for the committee to run for a further 18 months until March 2022, by which time I think we'll have a much clearer indication about the establishment of the Central Gloucestershire City Region Board, and also bearing in mind the item that's going to be coming up later in the agenda around the COVID-19 and potentially the business which this committee will be considering in response to Gloucestershire's economic recovery. So 2 elements to the recommendation that you can see there. Chair, if members are minded to approve the recommendation, what we would then do is we would approach the individual councils concerned, who would also agree to support and consider supporting the recommendation that the committee should continue for the further 18-month term. I think that's all I've really got to add. I think there is obviously a little bit more detail in the report, so happy to take any questions if there are any, Chair.
Thank you, Gillian. Does anybody have any questions? Mike, first of all, do you want to come in, Mike? Do you want to add anything to Gillian?
No, I think Gillian's covered it, but I'm happy to join in and respond to questions of members. Thank you.
Okie doke. Has anybody got a question or a comment?
Sorry, Patrick, I did the raise hand again, so I don't know if that's being noticed or not, but if I can come in there, so
I can't see any raised hands.
No,
some of the technology can be.
Steve, your hand isn't up.
Oh, I click that. It tells me it is up on my one, so that's interesting. I've got an option to lower hand now, so assuming by definition it must be up. But no, anyway, so that obviously isn't working, so I'll note that for future. Sorry about that. Yeah, just a comment really rather than the question and possibly a suggestion. I think clearly entirely understand the circumstances. Obviously, it's a bit unfortunate that we actually didn't notice about the 12-month notice period, because obviously we sort of steamed through that. We now virtually got to the end of it. So we do need to do something clearly rather than cease to exist in September. I think the 18 months seems a sensible option to me, because I think theoretically say, well, we'll extend it for another 5-6 years or whatever, as for the previous one, or just do a rolling 12 months. But if we did that, then we'd almost back in the same situation almost immediately again. So 18 months seems reasonable. But what I think, as was mentioned in the introduction, I think we do need to agree that we are going to formally review its role early enough in the 18 months to have a sensible discussion about it. So I think it's entirely true, and I know I've raised the point before, that as we created the sort of city region board and other things we're sort of creating as we go, we do need to look at what's there at the moment and how this works best. I mean, a good example being a future item on this agenda about the funding, where we're saying that we potentially allocate 2 million to the city region, but this committee then needs to sign off every bit of the spending, and we need to look at that sort of thing, how sensible that is and how that's going to work. So I think I agree with the recommendations, but I'd like to add the third about we do formally review the role of this committee in the context of what is now in place well in advance to the end of the 18 months, if we could hopefully agree to that.
Gillian, Mike, is there any issue with adding that as the third point?
From my point of view, lead officer, no, I think that's quite sensible. We are looking at the moment at the governance arrangements of a number of partnerships, particularly the City Region Board and how that fits in. And I think that's a sensible proposal, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. Does anybody else have a comment or a question?
I'm not seeing any raised hands, but like Steve said, I'm not sure it's working as it should be. I just do a check. Just do a check with Ryan. Do you want to just check, Ryan, that we can see hands? So if I put mine up, can you see my hand up?
Yeah, I'm going to make you host, Simon, see if you can see it that way.
Okay.
In the meantime, I think a bit like Steve did, if you do want to make a comment or a question, please just say your name or draw us to your attention.
Yeah.
Patrick,
it's just worth saying, can I just check to see whether Richard Leppington is in on the call? Because we've got a telephone caller in.
Richard, are you online?
No, that's
not Richard.
Someone else on the telephone. Okay. All right, carry on.
Doina, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Sorry, yeah, I did have my hand raised, but it doesn't seem to be working. Yeah, it's just a comment or a question or comment really. Is on the paper it says that the aim of the committee was around promoting economic well-being, but then the name of the committee is around economic growth, and I just felt that was an interesting discrepancy. I mean, I guess if we're going to just agree to renew it, we would just stick with the name that exists. But I think as part of the review, and I'd support Steve's comments around really reviewing the purpose of the committee, that perhaps we give some thought to that. I certainly have comments back, I can imagine, from Stroud District around growth and its wider context, and well-being is obviously absolutely crucial. So whether we perhaps think about that sort of slight difference in the definition of the aim in the committee and actually what do we call it. I think certainly in the emerging plans around recovery, well-being is going to be absolutely as crucial as growth. But perhaps if we're just recommending a renewal, we might leave it as it is. But I'd certainly welcome a discussion around that going forwards.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point, Dinah. I think well-being is going to be crucial. I think one thing the pandemic has shown us is it is about well-being as much as anything else. So economic well-being, I think, is going to be very important as well as the growth.
Chair, may I just come in there, please? It's Gillian here.
Yeah.
One of the other functions of the committee also includes, as Councillor Doyle also said, is to lobby and carry out other activities to help achieve the promotion or improvement of the economic well-being of the area of Gloucestershire. So there is already the scope there. So just to reassure members that the item later on the agenda, where you're talking about COVID-19, you are still within your powers that fall within the functions of this joint committee.
Terrific. Thank you, Gillian. Thank you for that clarity. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? No? Well, we are asked two things: to note the overall governance arrangements for the committee as set out in the report, and the extension for the committee of 18 months from September 2020. Are we all happy, content with that?
Okay, just with my amendment, if that's okay.
With Steve's, and the third part, Steve's amendment, yes. Is that noted, Joe?
At the risk of asking a technical question, how are we voting on this?
That was going to be my. I was going to suggest if everybody's happy, if you're unhappy or don't want to vote against, please make yourself known. Otherwise, we'll take it as accepted. Is everybody happy with that, or shall we go around the committee?
I can go around the committee if you want me to.
Does anybody have any objections to the recommendations as set out? No, are we all happy that I accept that as confirmation that we are, as a committee, accepting the recommendations as laid out in the report, and to include Steve Jordan's third point? Okay, we'll take that as happy then. We'll move on to our next item, which is the business rate pool funding update and SEDF funding proposals. So we start with Andrew Cummings, who will give us an update on the business rate pool, and then we'll come to Mike Dawson for the funding. So Andrew, do you want to come in and give us an update on the business rate pool, please?
Certainly, Chair. Thank you. And I hope everyone can hear me okay, and you've got the report in front of you there. So the financial forecast within the report is the section which is from paragraph 16 onwards. So I'll just take you through the main highlights, essentially. The opening point is that we've now had confirmed the financial gain that we had from the business rates pilot in 2018-19. That's just over 3.4 million, as you can see in paragraph 16. In 17, I discussed the potential impact of the pandemic on the business rates pool and the SEDF as a consequence, and essentially that it's almost impossible to quantify at the moment. So district councils, the billing authorities, are currently in the process of pulling together their final accounts for the 2019-20 year. I'm not expecting much impact on business rates as a result of the pandemic. Normally by this time of year, we probably would have had the final figures start to come through, but it's fair to say that the teams in councils who do the business rates accounting are the same teams who have been distributing over 100 million of grants across the county in recent weeks, and that inevitably is where their resource. Essentially, paragraph 19 talks about what the current estimate of the pool gain is for the financial year, and that's after adjustments for the pandemic, which is 4.5 million, which is still really strong. That's growth retained within the county, which otherwise would be returned to central government if we weren't in pooling arrangement. The table just below paragraph 20 sets that out, and the headline for this committee, of course, is the Strategic Economic Development Fund, which receives a share, and that's estimated to be 900,000 for future years, so for this current year. The gain in future years is far from certain. As always, I've put in an estimate based on the current business rates position of what that would be. I've allowed for a 20% reduction as a result of the uncertainty of the business rates position. One of the things which makes it slightly harder to see this year what the impact will be is that many businesses have benefited from the expanded retail relief up to 100%, which many businesses are benefiting from. So it makes it quite hard to see what the cash collected would be if that was not there. Just to reassure the committee, the discounts for businesses this year, the business rates holidays that so many people have had, doesn't impact on the pool because councils are fully reimbursed in grant from central government, and that goes into the overall pool position, so that doesn't have an impact for us. Paragraphs 22 and 23 just talk about the long-term future of the pool. The shelves behind me don't contain a crystal ball, so this is quite hard to work out at the moment. We do know that business rates pooling is continuing for 2020, 2021. Stroud will continue to act as the lead, so we will have a further year of gain. What that will be is unsure, and as I've said, I've made an adjustment for that. The government have delayed the fair funding review and the wider review of business rates, which is going to take place. So it may well be that there are additional years of the pool after 2020-21, but we don't quite know for certain yet. And I've also put in just a note there about the NHS Foundation Trust's legal case, which has been a feature of many of these reports in the past. The High Court did rule in December that NHS trusts and foundation trusts are not eligible for the business rates relief. However, it is understood that they are seeking leave to appeal. So I can update on that in future reports. I know Mike's going to take you through the funding proposals which are in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions now on the financial position if members want to share, or I can pass over to Mike for the other sections.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anybody have any questions for Andrew before we move on to Mike?
John McGinty, Patrick.
John, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask Andrew, I saw in the news last week about an adverse finding for councils on the separate classification of ATMs, business rates purposes. I was wondering if you thought that was going to have any impact on the future pool.
It could do, John. It may not have a huge impact. Most councils, I think, will already have made quite significant provisions for that when the case originally appeared last year, I think it was. And this was effectively the final ruling that, yes, where a business has an ATM, it can't be separately assessed for business rates. So I think most of that impact will have already been in last year, John, but it might have a small impact, but not a material one.
Anybody else have a question?
Steve Mawson.
Steve Mawson.
Thank you, Andrew. And I absolutely share on behalf of the committee the worrying times in terms of the business rates predictions that we go forward. Just to raise another one into the melting pot, really, we have heard that potentially government might still go ahead with the business rates reset, which would probably kick in from 21-22. I wondered if you just had a thought what that impact might be on the growth estimates.
Yeah, I think that's the uncertainty that I was referring to, 21-22, Steve. So the government has always said that they will reset the estimated business rates positions across the country, and effectively what that would do would be redistribute growth, and Gloucestershire would be a significant net loser from that. We can see the levels of growth we've had. If that's redistributed elsewhere, then that's going to have a major impact. But that's why at the moment the projection for the pool at Appendix B doesn't include any gain in 21-22. I just think it's too uncertain for us to be able to assume that anything will be coming back there.
Okay, thank you, Steve, and thank you, Andrew. Anybody else got a question?
I've got nobody else with hands up.
Nobody with hands up. Okay. Well, thank you, Andrew. Andrew's report is just for noting. Mike, do you want to lead us through the two funding proposals?
Okay, thank you, Chair. I will deal with the first element of this if I would, and then I'll hand over to Colin Chick for the second part. So if I deal with the proposal in recommendation to the set aside of an allocation of £2 million within the Strategic Economic Development Fund, then Colin will deal with the specifics of the transport, multimodal transport bid, if that's okay, Chair. So in terms of the set aside allocation, many members, I think, will be familiar with the discussions that occurred at Leadership Gloucestershire in March in respect of what were the three 2050 boards, Severn Vale, Rural Ambitions and the Central Gloucestershire City Region. There'd been discussion amongst members and officers for a little while, but Leadership Gloucestershire considered that given the fact that Gloucestershire as a whole tended to act as to a large extent, a single functioning economic unit, particularly in terms of transport, public transport, and the links between the various districts, it would be better if we had a single city region board for the whole of the county, rather than excluding certain districts from that, and that it would be appropriate, therefore, to merge the other two boards with the central region, city region board. Now, I think one of the issues that was raised was the Rural Ambitions board work, which Leadership Gloucestershire recognised as being very important and needed to carry on. What Leadership Gloucestershire agreed in March, just to remind those members who were there and for those who weren't, just to let you know, was that because that work was important, that the governance arrangements for the City Region Board, when approved, would need to take account of that work. We are working at the moment on the governance for the newly enlarged City Region Board, and that will go back to Leadership Gloucestershire for approval in due course. So that's where we are in terms of the board structure. It was agreed by Leadership Gloucestershire that there was a considerable amount of work in the coming months, indeed years, for the City Region Board, and it would be really important that the board had access to significant funding to support its work. So the report actually identifies a range of potential projects which are likely to come forward and require funding for the benefit of the whole county, for which the Strategic Economic Development Fund was recognised as a potential funding source. So Leadership Gloucestershire, having considered the large amount of work that's required, agreed that it would be appropriate to request of this committee to set aside a £2 million fund within the Strategic Economic Development Fund to be available to the City Region Board to be drawn down to fund individual projects. Now, it's not the intention at this stage that allocation is completely drawn down and that's the end of it. The proposal in the report is that when schemes come forward that require funding, they will need to be formally assessed by senior officer group, as all funding bids required, and they will then come forward in that manner for detailed funding. So what we're proposing here is a set aside of £2 million within the Strategic Economic Development Fund, but that future projects that require funding will come forward on a project by project basis for assessment and agreement by the committee. The senior officer group did look at this earlier on in March and felt that the approach of setting aside funding was a very sensible approach because of the extent of the work that when the City Region board started to move would need to be undertaken, and that it would indeed be very much for the benefit of the whole county. So that is the proposal in recommendation for the set aside allocation of £2 million within the SEDIF for the city region board, and that is subject to further reports on a project by project basis for detailed funding. Just then moving on then for the first drawdown of that funding, when if it is approved, is for the multimodal transport brief, which is set out from paragraph 13 onwards in this report. That is a detailed proposal. It has been assessed by the senior officer group, and the paperwork for that is attached to the agenda, Chair. But in terms of the detail of that project, I'll bow to Colin's better knowledge than mine and hand over to him in terms of the presentation there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
We have got a question from Steve Jordan.
Yeah, we'll take some questions before we come to Colin. So, Steve, do you want to come in?
Sorry, Chair, I was happy to come in after Colin, so it's more a generic point rather than a question. So I'm happy to follow Colin if that works for you.
Okay, do we have anybody else who wants...
No one else with hands up.
Nobody else with hands up? Okay, we'll move on then to Colin to outline the proposal for the multimodal transport brief. Colin?
Good morning, everyone. The multimodal model is probably something that the county should have had for a long time. What we've actually traditionally done is we've looked at, we've got a highways model, which enables all developments when they're coming forward for the local planning authorities, etc., to be looked at to see how the impact on the existing highway network. And we have been rather dominated by that approach because the solution is always highway based. What we never had the ability to do is, apart from almost like finger in the air and what we actually think improvements are needed by public transport for a development, is ever been able to assess what the public transport requirements are of a development, and equally what the public transport requirements are for the county as a whole, and how we can achieve a modal shift. And what this model will actually do is allow development of a spatial plan for the county, looking at it from a sustainable transport basis, and making sure that developments that within that spatial plan are put and located in the most advantageous ways from day one to encourage people to move by sustainable transport means rather than just the car. It will enable long-term planning to be taken account of in development work by the LPAs. We've never ever been able to. The LPAs have never been able to assess what improvements are needed for a development on a local level in terms of public transport and where the missing links are and things like that. It would enable developments to be looked at and then to go back to developers and ask for improvements or funding for those transport improvements to be included as part of that development. So it gives us both long-term direction in terms of land use planning and sustainable planning, so that's transport planning, but also in the intermediate period before we get a long-term spatial plan that we can use as a county. It will enable local planning authorities to look at each development in turn at a local level. It will obviously can be used quite easily to encourage modal shift. And by achieving that, as we've seen recently with the epidemic, the massive improvement you get to air quality and obviously necessary improvements on climate change that we're all aiming to achieve. The other thing it does is would give us a robust study model that we could use to develop a business case for a transit system, that I think a mass transit system through the spine of the central part of the county, which has been spoken about by for some time. But without such a model, it would be very difficult to even justify that type of transport improvement. And obviously that aligns perfectly with the LIS, which contains that as a quite a strong backbone or pillar of the of moving forward in terms of sustainability, business improvement, whilst at the same time achieving climate change. And it probably covers off most things. I think it will probably take about 18 months to build. I would argue that probably that's almost 18 months we can't afford if we really want to get on with moving the county forward in the most sustainable way and judging developments in the future, and also getting a long-term plan together for the county, then unfortunately I'd like to have had it in my pocket today, but we haven't. But it's probably 18 months away to get into that position. It's something that all the chief execs have spoken about as part of when we was looking at the early days, probably 6 months ago, about the city region basis for moving forward, and along with a spatial plan. I think that probably covers everything I wanted to cover. Other than the cost, which is £410,000, I think.
410. Thank you, Colin. Does anybody have any questions for either Mike or Colin?
So we've got Steve.
Steve Jordan.
Listed there. Yeah, waiting.
Sorry, Chair, yeah, that's more a comment really, but just in terms of the perspective on this, I think, because clearly this conversation has been going on for a while, so I think in the circumstances, there's two particular things I think we need to bear in mind. The first is I think everything we're doing should be reviewed in the context of whatever we said sort of 6 months ago. We need to review, is it still relevant now? Is it still the right thing to be doing? And secondly, the extreme caution I think we need to apply to future funding from our economic development pot, because I think business rates are going to take a big hit. Therefore, we shouldn't be making any assumptions that what any future income into that pot, and they're even more emphasising the importance of considering what we're spending and what we do have on at the moment. Having said that, I think this is still the right thing to be doing. So I think allocating to city region fund, particularly as we're talking about, that's broad and county-wide now, that covers everyone's interest, as it were, still seems to be the right thing to be doing. In terms of the list of projects we've got, we have there, I'm sure those will move around, but we're not actually agreeing those today. We're saying in principle, these are the things we should be looking at if we had the £2 million. However, I'd also agree that the multimodal work is even more important now than it was before, if anything. So it is actually essential we do get on with that. So I entirely support that being cracked on with as quickly as we can do in the circumstance. So I would support the recommendations laid out here, Chair. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Steve. Anybody else got a question or a comment? No?
Got no one with Councillor Dale's just put his hand up.
All right. Councillor Dale.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Molyneux. I'm very supportive of a multimodal model, and it's something that we've lacked as an evidence base for far too long. And I know that my planners particularly will welcome this development. It is important that we understand the difference between a multimodal model and one that actually works well to effectively model all the potential forms of transport. I'm acutely conscious that with the absence of any public transport link currently that runs up and down the Foss Way through the Cotswolds, that it would be hard to find the data to model public transport moving between the only rail hubs in Kemble and Morton. So I'm very keen to see that any model that's developed properly models what public transport requirements exist in the absence of data, because there is no link today. The same is also true of not just self-supporting modes of transport such as walking and cycling, but adding the capability of people to use electric cycles to move between market towns and villages, which again we have no data or evidence for today, but need to be considered as part of our planning. I was, for example, extremely distressed when I went to the consultation for the air balloon development, and I found that the modelers there did not include any heavy goods vehicle traffic coming from the A40 along the A436 into the air balloon junction. They only modelled the heavy goods traffic moving up and down the air balloon hill. So, you know, it's very easy to create the models. It's much harder to create the models with good data. So can I please emphasise the need for modelling of high quality data, particularly in the Forest of Dean and in the Cotswolds areas?
Yeah, thank you, Tony. Colin, do you want to comment on that?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. And it's as important for and probably more important for the rural areas than it is for the central core area. The central core area, it's absolutely key for, you know, as I said, the business case for the mass transit system. But in the rural areas, it becomes really important because what it will enable us to do is very quickly see what the missing links are, and actually build up what's called a public transport accessibility indices. So we can actually then pull the county into a series of areas where there's good quality public transport and where there isn't, and we can measure that. And so it actually gives that really strong evidence base moving forward into the future.
Thank you, Colin. Does anybody else have a question or a comment?
No other hands up, Patrick.
Hands up. Okay, well, I agree with Steve Jordan, his comments, and Tony's as well. We need to look at the two sections. Obviously, Section A is the allocation of £2 million. If we don't do that, then Section B is redundant. So are we all content with Section A and the set-aside allocation of £2 million for the SEDF, from the SEDF fund, as requested by Leadership Gloucestershire? Maybe we should vote on these things, Simon. If we asked all the voting members to raise their hands with the button, would that be a way of doing it?
Well, what I could do very simply for this one, if you like, is go through the members of the committee. And Joe, if you can just record, if you could just say for, against, or abstain.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going through the elected members of the committee for this purpose, right? So starting with Councillor Tony Dale.
For.
Steve Jordan. For. Richard Lappington's not on the line. Richard Cook.
For.
Doina Canal.
For.
Rob Bird. For. And then you, Chair Patrick Molyneux.
Yep, 4.
So you've got 6 votes in favour and 1 member not present.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, members.
Can I just check with Joe that you are comfortable with that? You got that? Joe Moore? She's probably muted. I'm assuming she's all okay with that.
Okay.
All right.
On that basis, we can go on to item number B then. And this is the allocation of £410,000 for the multimodal transport brief, or commissioning of a multimodal transport brief. Are we all happy with that? Do you want to go through the members?
Go through the same process as well. So, Tony Dale.
For.
Steve Jordan.
For.
Richard Cook.
For.
Doina Canal.
I'll mute. For.
Rob Bird. Rob, you there? Didn't hear you then. 4. Yeah, fine. And Patrick Molyneux, yep. 4. So again, 6 in favour.
Terrific. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, we'll move on to item number 7, and this is the strategic planning funding proposal. And I'll ask Mike to come in and give us a background on this project. Mike.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This report relates to the strategic planning project which the committee's been working at for the last 2 or so years with a consultant, John Baker, Tradingers Point Consultancy. And we have made progress with this over that period of time. However, John's contract has now expired, and the issue really was earlier on this year that we had to put some temporary arrangements in to cover the project because John wasn't able to continue for several months. The proposal within the report is that now John's contract has actually expired on the 31st of May, that we continue those temporary project arrangements to complete the project. And that is that Cheltenham Borough Council have offered the resources of a senior planning manager, David Oakhill, on the basis of an at-cost arrangements to complete the project, and therefore it is proposed that we should continue the project to deliver the strategic the statement of common ground approach to strategic planning in the county in this way. However, what we do need to agree is to actually agree the sharing arrangements, and the proposal in the report is we continue the formula to share the costs of this particular function, but based on the costs produced by Cheltenham Borough Council, which would be a significant reduction for authorities, member authorities of the Joint Committee, because the costs will be quite a lot lower. So that is the proposal. It's a resource that wasn't available to us when we started the project, but thanks to Cheltenham Borough Council for proposing that David Oakhill would be available, and it's just to confirm the continuing arrangements, but with David leading the project. Thank you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mike. Does anybody have any questions for Mike on this item?
No hands up. Patrick?
No hands up. Okay. Well, basically, we're asked to note the current position in respect of the Strategic Spatial Planning Coordination Project. But we're also asked to approve the proposal set out in section 3 of the report. So once again, Simon, if we can go around the voting members, and I'll ask you whether you're happy to approve the proposals.
Thanks, Chair. So again, 4 against or abstain. Councillor Tony Dale. Steve Jordan?
Just to cover the interest, I'll abstain.
Abstain, okay. Richard Cook. 4. Rowena Canal.
4.
Rob Bird. 4. And Patrick as chair.
4.
Okay, so you've got 6. You've got 5 in favour and 1 abstention from Steve Jordan.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Carried. Okay, we'll now move on to these items are for information. And the first is the G1st LEP update. So I'd like to invite Dev to present the update. Dev.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you've all had a chance to read my report. I didn't intend going through it line by line. I think if you're like me, you probably want to spend more time focusing on the recovery planning, next item on the agenda. But the one message I wanted to get across really was that it would be ludicrous to say anything at the moment is business as usual. But what we're trying to do with all our partners and projects is to keep them moving along. We certainly none of them have absolutely just come to a grinding halt. So whether it's the Cyber Park, Gloucester railway station or the airport, all those projects have been ticking along to some extent over the last 2 to 3 months. You know, we'll continue to do that. As I said, COVID-19 has certainly slowed projects down. Yes, as much as they can be, we've tried to do business as usual with all of those projects. So unless anyone had any specific questions on the report, I was going to say that was all I wanted to say really on the report.
Thank you, Dev. Does anybody want to does anybody have a question for Dev based on the report?
No hands up.
No hands up. Okay, well, in that basis, we're all very happy. Well, thank you, Dev. And yes, we appreciate it is difficult circumstances, but good to hear the projects are still moving forward. That's the important part. Okay, we move on to item number 9. COVID-19 response, planning for Gloucestershire's economic recovery. I'll get Mike Dawson to introduce the report, then Lisa will come, or Mike will introduce the item, Lisa will present the report, and then we'll have David Owen from G1st to give us an update at the end of that. So I'll hand over to Mike.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering from Lisa's point of view whether it could be useful for David to report in front of Lisa just for the flow of the agenda. I don't know whether that's possible, Chair.
Yeah, I've got no particular objection to that if you think that would be a better narrative.
I'm not. It was whether David agrees, really.
I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay, that will just allow us to flow into the debate following Lisa's presentation, Chair, with the update from David about the LEPS approach to this. I think that would be very helpful.
Okay.
Okay. In terms of what we're doing today, we all know we are in extraordinary times, and as far as the Gloucestershire economy is concerned, it is under significant threat in terms of the coronavirus pandemic. And everybody around this table, I think, is putting a lot of thought at the moment into what is our response to that, but also importantly, what is our recovery and our recovery plans in the short term and the long term. There's also questions around the details yet of what we are recovering from. That, I think, has still got time to play out yet, so that we understand the situation we face. But there are things that we need to be getting on with sooner rather than later in order to try and get the economy restarted. So there is a lot to discuss, Chair. There have been a number of discussions and groups discussing recovery and economic recovery, in particular around the county. The chief executives have had a brief discussion, and indeed the senior officer group has had a brief discussion. And I know that leaders occasionally have come together and had some discussions around this. But we felt it would be helpful today for the committee and its officers to perhaps engage in a discussion about how we move forward with economic recovery planning for Gloucestershire in the light of the coronavirus pandemic. I think it would be unreasonable to think this morning that we'll solve it. So I think just understanding what we're about this morning might be helpful for members. And the first thing is just to perhaps start to help understand the task ahead. What is it? What does it look like? How long is it likely to go on for? What can we do as local authorities in partnership and individually? What does it look like in terms of its layers? And we've all spoken about it needing to be a place approach, but it also needs to be knitted together in a way that makes sense for the county, so that we're not duplicating and treading on each other's toes, and wherever possible we work together in partnership to get the best out of our plans. There's a bit also, I think, Chair, in the discussion of understanding where we all are now, and what is the status of our planning, and when maybe can we expect to see plans starting to come out of our organisations. And then also possibly around the immediate task. What is it we need to be getting on with now? What do we need to coordinate now in order to make sense of our plans? And then finally, I think there are some principles perhaps around how we work together for economic recovery planning. What's the role of the Joint Committee and its senior officer group attached to that? And there are some, I think, proposals within Lisa's presentation around that. So that would be my introduction. I don't think we'll solve the issue this morning, but I think it's a great opportunity for members and officers to discuss this issue between us at this point and see if we can shed some light on how we go forward. Of course, it's not just the local authorities that are planning for this. The LEP clearly have major responsibilities here on behalf of business to plan for recovery. I think one of the biggest issues about how we work together across all the piece here and make sure that we're all effective in partnership. And I think we may, as a joint committee, and our next meeting is in plan meeting is in September, and I would propose, Chair, that we probably need to come back together again, probably in July, to work up a bit more detail about where we're going forward. So with those opening remarks, Chair, I'll hand over to David, who could perhaps just update us on the G1st LEPS work at the moment to with their recovery planning. Thank you.
So yeah, you are.
Thanks, Mike. I'm having some connectivity problems this morning, so hopefully the internet works. You'll
We're
hear
getting
me.
a lot of interference in the background of some people.
I can hear some banging somewhere. It's not here.
Better?
Okay.
Better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. David.
So hopefully the internet stacks up. I'm not in the forest, I'm in Stroud, so the internet's bad all over the county at times. I'll do a brief introduction and then hand over to Nick Holyoke, who's coordinating our recovery planning for the LEP. So our approach has been really 4 phases. First phase was providing emergency support, so ensuring that businesses in the county were getting the information that they needed to access the government supports, which of course was administrated through the districts. Analysing the economic shock, so starting to understand what the impact might be on Gloucestershire's economy and feeding that up to be up until having daily calls with Bays to feed in information to them that we were getting from businesses about where the gaps were and where some of the specific challenges were for those businesses. Third phase then is about creating the economic recovery plan, and Nick will talk through both what we are seeing about what the scale of the economic shock will be and where we are in recovery planning. And then the final 4th phase is about ensuring we've got that long-term economic resilience in the county's economy, so that we address some of the longer-term challenges that we're going to have, that both some of those that are created by COVID and some of those that we had in any case. I think what I would say is, so the contact with central government's been excellent. So Karen Lee, who's our area lead, has been very proactive in passing messages up from Gloucestershire as to some of the specific challenges that we've got in the county, and we've seen that working. We've seen some of the announcements, primarily by Rishi Sunak, in the support for businesses and charities and other organisations that have come through some of the feedback that we've put in through Gloucestershire. Diane Savory, our chair, was invited to join Simon Clarke's National Economic Recovery Group. So that's 2 LEP chairs, 4 of the elected mayors, so Mayor of London, West Midlands, Greater Manchester, and 1 other, and representatives from local government associations. So she has bi-weekly calls with Simon Clarke, again feeding into the recovery process and what the impact is likely to be on individual places. And we held a round table with Simon Clarke and Paul Scully, Ministers for Bays and MHCLG, a week ago last Friday, to get businesses discussing what some of the challenges that they were seeing were, feeding that directly into ministers. So communication with central government has been very good, very positive. I think just before I pass on to Nick, I guess the 2 striking figures for me, if you look at the results of our business survey, I trust all of you are getting our weekly reports that are coming through. 44% of businesses in Gloucestershire that have answered the survey are concerned about their long-term survival. So I don't think we should underestimate the impact that COVID might have on our businesses in the county. I wouldn't say 44% are not going to survive. Naturally, those who are most concerned are going to be filling out the survey. The second piece of data that we've had confirmed was the unemployment statistics that came out probably 10 days ago now, where we saw our employment almost doubling in Gloucestershire during April. Went from 2% to 3.7%, and obviously that's with furloughing in place, and with somewhere between 20 and 25% of the workforce in the county currently furloughed and paid for by government. So the unemployment concern is going to really hit the mix when we get beyond furloughing, or we see changes in the furloughing scheme in August. And with that, unless anybody's got any immediate questions on that, I'll happily pass on to Nick to talk through some of the recovery activity and where we've got with planning.
No questions. No one indicating, Patrick, at the moment.
No questions. Okay, should we move on to Nick then?
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to try and share a screen for a PowerPoint presentation. Someone could give me control or allow me to do that?
You can do that yourself.
Brilliant. Let's give it a go then.
So you in the middle. Can you?
Yeah,
see
I'm
that?
okay with that. I just wanted to check I had
Yeah, you should be able to do it.
Cool. It's great. Yeah.
Have a go.
Hopefully, people can see a presentation now.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to talk you through what G1st LEP are doing with regard to the economic recovery planning in coordination with the local authorities and Gloucestershire County Council. So this slide is basically showing you what our activities are, the 3 steps, and I'll talk you through those in a moment. But just to reiterate what you've been saying this morning, that the local authorities will be doing place-based recovery plans, and you can see there where we believe from the conversations we've had with those authorities over the last 2 to 3 weeks, the main focuses will be, but that's changing all the time as everything is, and where we believe that Gloucestershire County Council's main roles will sit. Obviously, respect the local industrial strategy is one of the key things. I was lucky enough to be involved pre-COVID and in reviewing businesses' views on the local industrial strategy. So we've got a really clear idea about what those key areas are. Obviously, the high GVA sectors, engineering, manufacturing, and particularly aerospace. And I'll talk about the IT and cyber security as we march through. So the key role for the G1st LEP, and it's been sort of already said this morning, is actually bringing the business's views to the recovery planning that you're all undertaking. And as such, I think most of you will be aware of, and quite a few of you sit on business groups, and I've met you there, that we have this range of business groups that have been running now for a number of years, have very strong representation from each sector, and a really good way of gathering information and feedback throughout local industrial strategy planning, strategic economic plans, and obviously now in the COVID are absolutely key. So you can see down the left-hand side all of those business groups. There's also very strong links to trade and membership bodies, Gloucestershire Economics Employer Skills Group, germ subgroups, and clearly the Gloucestershire Growth Hub network, with all its physical and now virtual presence, is constantly getting feedback from the businesses. So we've got a great ability to gain what's been labelled here as sectoral intelligence, and I would actually just say is subjective information. It's where we're talking to businesses regularly, they're emailing us with comments, so we're able to put texture onto the data that's being collected. And that's the second stage of the LEP approach, is economic data and impact modelling. We've engaged Harvey Jones, who we've worked with before, to help us develop very detailed information with regard to the business groups by district, how each sector is being affected. And I've got the first cut of that information in the presentation later. It's very high level. Literally, they've been working in a very tight time scale. We also gather our own data. We've been running 2 business surveys. And we're just about to go out to 175 of the top businesses in Gloucestershire for a telephone-based survey. So we've started that this week. We're hitting about 50 every week with the help of some of the local authorities. We've had our first 5 responses. So again, it's good textual information to put on top of the hard economic data, which is absolutely essential. And clearly we're working with Kate and GCC to use all the data that's coming through your own channels as well. So we've got both objective and subjective, and we just see also our role is to actually encourage this process of transformational thinking. Again, you've all been talking about. It's possibly not recovery. I think we're starting to move. It's a restart. It's a reimagining of what Gloucestershire can look like post-COVID. Is there any way that there is an advantage for this county to leapfrog some of the other counties with regard to its economic growth with some of the advantages we have here? So we'll be looking at areas such as mental health and well-being, community and business resilience, how the voluntary sector works, arts and culture, carbon neutrality, and again, this massive opportunity we've got to all work collaboratively across people. So that's just basically laying out our sort of the project approach. My next slide is to start talking about what we're doing and how it's all fitting together. But again, I understand that maybe the concepts may be new to people, so would welcome any questions.
Okay, let's have a look to see if we have anyone. No one indicating at the moment. Oh, we've got John McGinty.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Nick, are you Are you sense checking some of this? Are you talking to local authorities and developing this sort of plan? Because some of the roles you've listed down on this slide don't quite tally with my understanding of doing what.
We are Stroud and the council, and so we have been going through it. But we haven't formal sense check. This is our process. The German group has a group of local authorities, and this slide was presented to that group last week as well. So we are going through a sense checking process, but obviously willing to take any more input.
Well, things like grants and aid for business survival have been put out through district councils rather than GCC, as far as I'm.
Okay, great.
And yeah, adapting public space again. Districts are doing quite a lot of stuff on the public realm. I appreciate the county are looking at adapting the highways and pop-up cycle paths and widening pavements and things like that. But the districts are also doing some adapting of public space.
Yeah, definitely aware of that. And actually, that adapting public space comes up later on as well. So I'm happy that covers in both areas.
Ask a question.
Yeah, Doino, we've got you. Yeah, go on.
Thank you. So as well as the sectors, I wondered, do you also look at it from the point of view of size of business? Because one of the things that came very clear to us, we weren't quite aware of it in Stroud, is when we were handing out the business grants, how many small and micro businesses we have. My concern is, I don't know how you drill down into the responses you're getting back to make sure you're not just hearing from the most organised and larger businesses who may have the resources to spend time engaging with the LEP. There'll be a whole sort of layer of very, very small businesses who will be affected. And I just wonder if we can feel confident that we really are reaching them across the county, and as well, sole traders and the self-employed. And I wonder if, as well as sort of defining things according to, where they work, we should also be looking at, how self-employed or small businesses might be affected, as opposed to the larger ones who may have the resources to sort of be more resilient. And I just wonder if that's something you've been thinking about, or anything that you've had back from government as well. Because I think, particularly as our district, we're concerned that whole layer there, it may be quite negatively impacted. Certainly something we've picked up through the grants that we've been allocating. And obviously we've got the new set of discretionary grants that we're going to have to start doing soon.
Certainly, we're confident that if you look at the survey results, if you look at the detail, we've got a really good spread of businesses. It's actually the larger businesses which are less likely to fill out the survey, and the really close relationship with FSB, of course, got their 4,500 members across the county, is really important. So that relationship with Sam Holliday, that many of you will know, who is the FSB officer in this part of the world, has been very, very useful. So we're really confident we're reaching as many businesses as we possibly can. Obviously, it's a bit of a double-edged sword. So if businesses want change and something to be different, they're going to have to invest the time in telling someone what that is. So and lots of that is coming through FSB, or it's coming directly through our survey work or through the growth hubs.
Reiterate that we had 600 responses to the initial survey. The vast majority of those were the SMEs, and you're right, about 90+% of businesses in Gloucestershire are smaller micros. We hear a lot of information through the Gloucestershire Growth Hub network, and with Stroud particularly, we actually had a lot of really good feedback from the Stroud Tourism Board, and we're working directly with them to help that specific group around tourism. We've actually set up specific work groups for it. So I would say, Jenny, to reiterate what David said, we hear more from the small micros than we do always from the large businesses, and hence the large business survey. But we're hearing a lot from the local businesses. A lot of self-employed people use our growth hubs as well. So I'm very confident.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna.
And we've got Colin Chick.
Thanks, Simon. One thing that has become really apparent to me and is growing almost by the day, and I've seen it before with the recession after 2008, and also seen it in other places in my career. For example, when I was at Luton and the car plant closed and things like that. And one thing that seems to happen in this situation is already getting the early stage now, and it's away from the sectoral, and it's not geographic, it's actually demographic, and that's the 16 to 24-year-olds, where they seem to be, they haven't got the experience and skills. When businesses are in stress, the first thing they normally give up is training, because they just want to sort of stick to their they're hardcore staff that have got experience, that don't need training. And I just wondered where we go to and how we best deal with that. What I'm looking at the moment from a GC perspective is to get our adult ed together with someone probably like Stuart Danson and others like that together to start to look. I mean, it's not an easy fix, a difficult one, this one, because it's about actually getting people into apprenticeships. And the worst part of all is that the people who get hit hardest in that 16 to 24 year group is got enough coming out of university with a degree. But if you've left school at 17, 18, applications, the areas that often people grow into first and gain experience is the leisure, the travel and the service-based industries, and then maybe grow through them. But of course, those jobs themselves are going to be in short supply as well. It's just something I think we need to be very, very cognizant on, because they're not a group that's got a voice naturally through business or anything else. So it's just something I think we need to be very much aware of.
Colin, I totally and utterly agree. This slide got Gloucestershire Employment and Skills Board, and I sat in on that meeting yesterday morning. And as a result of that, there is a slide at the end here talking about that 18 to 24-year-old group and the need for support and how they'll be hit as well. So totally agree.
No other speakers, Patrick?
Shall I move on to the next slide?
Yeah.
So this is just a report I picked up from McKinsey's, and it's the key bit. It's just to reiterate, and I think it's been said this morning, none of us really know what we're recovering from. It's likely to be the biggest depression we've seen since World War II. And if we take the A1 and A3 in the middle of this slide, which is basically saying the economic interventions are effective and the virus spread interventions are effective, the US and us are expecting around about a 9 to a 13% reduction in GDP. That's if it all goes smoothly. If we get into the B3 category and we all fail with regard to economic and health interventions, we'll possibly never recover from it. But so you can perm any one of those 9 potential economic recoveries balanced against health recoveries, and that's what we're trying to plan for, and as such makes life extremely difficult. So I was looking for a slide for ages which summarised the I don't know what we're dealing with type stuff, and I think McKinsey's slide there summarised that quite well. So what do we do? Well, we think there's 4 phases that we need to go through. There's the initial lockdown, which potentially we're starting to come towards the end, which is a 3-month period. Then we have a restart period of 2 quarters, which hopefully means that we don't go back into lockdown again, but it may be a regionally based. Then we go into revitalisation. And so we're talking 18 months to 24 months before we can actually get to any period of new normal, actually growth with a fully functioning economy, by which point in time we will have seen sectors go through huge changes. Some will grow, some will decline. I think it's clear at the moment that the decline will definitely happen in high street retail, and that's something we were seeing pre-COVID, and that may have just exacerbated that problem. But we may also see sectors prosper. ICT, online content provision, cybersecurity is already coming through as a growth sector. And clearly that plays well to Gloucestershire and the local industrial strategy and the investment that's being made in Cyber Central. So I'm naturally an optimist. I may not come through that in the next 15 minutes or so, but I try and see the positive side. So that's an initial view of the impacts and the stages we're going through. And that sort of ties up to the next slide and what we think the GVA and the economic impacts may be. So any questions for those 2 slides before I move on?
Colin, you've still got your hand up. Did you want to lower it? Was there something you wanted to raise? Okay, that's fine. No questions.
Okay, I'll move on then. So this is our very first cut of what the GVA impact will be on Gloucestershire. It's based on assumptions that we're changing all the time, but based on the pre-COVID baseline, we're looking at about a 30% reduction in GVA in the first quarter, and then not getting back to recovery till sort of 18, 24 months away. So we're going through, we're refining that information, and we're looking at what other sectors are saying as well. But that's tying up pretty closely with what all reports are saying. What we're doing now is actually then breaking down that GVA impact by sector the best that we can using the SIC codes where they tie in. They don't always tie into all sectors. Some of them aren't particularly modern in their styles. It's quite hard to get that through. So we'll also be layering that against the sectoral information we get and what the companies are saying. So any comments on that slide? Sorry, Simon, you're muted.
No questions.
Sorry, just I mean, it's John McGinty here. Just, I mean, my only observation is it presents a linear road upwards, and I'm not sure it is going to be as smooth as that. I think what we're hearing in terms of the development of local outbreak control plans is that there will be local instances where places might need to be locked down again, and then they go through that process again and again. So I'd be very surprised if it's as smooth as the graph indicates.
I totally agree, John, and that's why I posted those sort of 9 McKinsey's options right at the start. With how that graph moves will depend on which one of those sort of McKinsey recovery models we follow. If we don't get that smooth up and down, this won't follow that smooth up and down. So I totally agree. So the redundancy scenario. So at the moment, pre-COVID, there was about 334,000 employed in Gloucestershire. Lockdown, it looks like we've got about 95,000 supported by furlough. 6,000 were made redundant. And I think none of us will be surprised that once the furlough scheme starts to move, those redundancy numbers will increase significantly. And across all sectors, we're expecting around about an 11% redundancy for Gloucestershire figure. Again, that will be different sector by sector, and that's our next stage of work, to do that sector by sector and district by district. And again, it's a linear improvement, but I take John's point wholly. That depends on what happens with going to lockdown period and how successfully the virus is managed. I'll move on.
Yeah, no questions.
I'll leave you to nudge me, Simon, if there are any questions. Okay?
Yeah, I will do.
Thank you. Okay, so David referred to a number of surveys that we've run. This is we've moved from the initial "what do you think" to an impact survey, and I thought it was quite useful just to summarise this to people. So we're saying that clearly, sort of a high 90%, around 90% people have been negatively affected. We have got some people who are positively affected, and I'll move through to that in the sectoral analysis. But then we see sort of 52% of staff, companies have got staff furloughed. And then we talk about round about sort of another 50% are going to be, not all staff will come off furloughing, decreasing staff by 29%. So all this sort of textual information is backing up that the redundancy figures are going to be high, the GVA drops will be significant. And then we start to move into what you think the biggest issues will be over the next 6 months. Some of those won't be surprising. The one that comes through strongly is adapting workplace for social distancing. And it was being mentioned at the start, what can we do immediately? And that's coming through very strongly through tourism, retail, manufacturing, every single industry that's trying to reopen. How do you manage the 2 metre gap? We can talk about as we move through. So that's a snapshot. We're getting that information regularly. And that information is available. It comes through on the G1st LEP newsletter every week, which, as David said, I hope you're all receiving. Okay, what I'd like to move on to now is I've been able to go around talking virtually to all the sector groups, one-to-one conversations with many of those people, and I've got pages and pages of information. But what I've tried to do here is just take a sector overview of what I thought may be the key items of interest to you, things that you may not be hearing through the data, which we're just getting one by one. So if I can take just some of your time to talk through these. So the cyber area is definitely a growth sector. Companies moving people to work from home, work from anywhere, setting up online operations, security of teleconferencing. A lot of companies can't use teleconferencing because of security or contract concerns. The number of cyber risks are increasing drastically. So the cyber sector is they are saying they are seriously looking for staff, setting up apprenticeships. There is a concern about skill shortage for Cyber Central. So that is out of all this crisis, that is the sector that this county may well be able to grow in, and we're very well placed to do that because the work has already been done setting up and the cyber central area. So that's the positive. Let's start with the positive. If we then move to the right-hand side and look at agri-food and rural, obviously there was immediate impacts there on dairy, supply to catering and events just dropped off completely, and we'll all be aware of the crop picking issues. What the group also want to make very clear is it's not just COVID. They've been hit by 2 weather extremes. February, the fields were flooded, and as of today, we hadn't seen rain for 10 weeks. So actually, they're hitting a perfect storm. Not only can their product not particularly wanted, it's in the field, it hasn't grown effectively. So they are feeling extremely badly hit. And many of the farmers who were struggling previously spent good capital money to diversify into tourism, and they now find that's now suffering. So their capital investment has been put elsewhere, but that's not working out for them. So it's a group that are well represented by Farmers Union. We get a lot of representation from them, and will need looking after. We then move into energy. This is again another potential growth sector. Gloucestershire are already strong on the carbon agenda. Good innovative companies out there. I was able to sit on the energy business group pre-COVID and see what the plans were, and they were a very buoyant group with regards to helping with the achievement of the carbon agenda, alternative transportation methods, green power sources, energy efficient buildings. A lot of those ideas that are sitting in that energy and business group still exist. Potential growth areas for employment, certainly good area to support the growth of Gloucestershire and enable it to be a green county and successful. So a positive message from the energy sector. Construction infrastructure, all sites were initially closed. Those closures are now lifting. For example, certainly where the Cheltenham Borough Councils and other councils may have done the same, they've reduced some of the restrictions with regard to being out when building companies can work and how they can work. There's still a strong desire from the developers to build ongoing and more homes. And when you talk to one of the business groups, talked about the city regions and building communities where people will want to work from home, may want to work in a rural environment rather than a city-based urban environment is a real strength for us possibly. The use of green infrastructure, the mass transport and new transport solutions are all a potential for Gloucestershire. Commercial sites, there's going to be changes. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies, if their staff can work from home, they've now sent them home. They may never wanted to do for that, never thought remote working was possible. It's now working. So if they held 2 commercial sites, they may be going down to 1 commercial site and asking people to work from home. Other companies are saying they need more commercial sites because they need to actually distance. So there's a mix and match of what will happen with commercial property, but change of use will be very important, and there is still barriers to development with regards to the planning rules, the timescales, and if we can actually move the view of the construction infrastructure teams, if we're going to move out of this recession quickly by a building process, we need to remove some of those barriers, and there is a subgroup of local authority planners and developers talking about how that can happen. So I'm going to move on to the next sectors after this slide, but happy to answer whatever questions I can.
Nothing. No questions.
That's always worrying. Have I lost? Oh, thank you, Colin.
Chair, it's a comment from Mike, if I could.
Okay, thank you.
And all it is was about the timing. I'm not quite sure how many more slides we've got, but the meeting is slated to be complete at 12, and I think members would need. We've got a presentation from Lisa as well, perhaps not quite as long as this, but we will need an opportunity for members to have a discussion. So I'm not quite sure.
I've got 2 more quick slides I can just start through, Mike. No problem.
Thank you very much.
I'll scan through that. Any further questions then, and we can do the
We've
end.
got Colin, actually. Okay. We've got Colin. Did you want to come in? Colin's muted.
I think I'm okay now. It's a quickie, really. What we've seen in past recessions quite often happens is obviously people lose confidence, do not decide to sit comfortable in their housing and don't go and buy housing. So they sit where they are because of obviously the risks. That then basically causes a stagnation within the construction industry with building, etc., etc. And that's often, and I mean, a lot of work shows that for every £1 spent in construction, about £9 comes back into the general economy. So it's always a good way of getting yourself out of a situation we're in. But at the same time, it's always difficult to actually respond to. Have we got any feel yet? I mean, I've heard various stories, anecdotal evidence that a place like Gloucestershire may even have high house price increases because people, instead of living in expensive areas like London, they're now so used to actually working from home that they'll get a London salary but live in Gloucestershire or Gloucester or wherever. So I just wonder whether we've got any indication of that at all yet, or is it purely sort of anecdotal evidence?
It's purely anecdotal at the moment, but it's strong anecdotal that Bristol, London people are now being told they can work from home. They've always wanted sort of to come back to a rural area to work from, and are starting to look at houses within Gloucestershire, and the Gloucestershire house prices aren't showing a huge drop at the moment post-COVID. So it is a real potential that might be a market for Gloucestershire. Yeah. I'm going to move on and bear in mind the time aspect. So advanced engineering and manufacturing, companies have continued to fulfill existing contracts. 4 out of 5 manufacturing companies have kept going. The longer term impacts will be felt when those contracts end. And a lot of the problem is that those contracts will be impacted by the global economy. It's nothing we can do in Gloucestershire or even the UK. It will depend on what China and the US do. But we can expect, and it's public knowledge, 25% redundancies. We do have some quite strong defence contracts in Gloucestershire, so that may mitigate that. The one possible silver lining is that there's always been a large skill shortage in the semi-skilled trades for manufacturing and highly experienced areas. And even after that level of redundancies, those shortages may still exist. So we may still have an ability to develop people as we go through. And on to the final 2 sectors, visitor economy and tourism. Obviously, both, I'm going to do them both together because I can. They're both immediate and severe impacts. They're both looking forward to reopenings. The retail and high street, I think, is one I want to point out. Their fear is unmanaged crowds. They can manage the 2-metre gap in store. They're really concerned about how the queues are managed outside. And that comes back to the shared space issue. They have a big optimism over increased localism. People have got used to buying goods locally as well as shopping online. And there is a hope that that localism will continue and keep their trade running. And for the visitor economy, I think the key one for me is less customers and reduced margins, but the same costs mean there will be closures and redundancies. They talk about 3 winters of trading. And then just finally, a sectoral overview, which I'll scamper through. Furloughing is masking redundancies. There's business out there that have already failed. They may not know it or they may not want to admit it, but once furloughing ends, they will go. So that we'll see a big increase in redundancies as that scheme starts to change. There's big concerns over physical distancing and how that will be managed logistically. Colin's comment about the 18 to 24-year-olds, the discussion around the skills group was they're expecting a 30% redundancy rather than a 10% average for that green group, and the support and the creation of support schemes specific to those are essential. Health and well-being, we mustn't miss that issue. The mental health of people have been affected severely, as will be underlying health conditions. So that will start to come out over a longer term. The voluntary sector are concerned. They look back to 2008. Their cash flow will be massively restricted by this. So though there will be an increasing number of volunteers, their ability to deliver services may be reduced. Arts and culture, no funds, an audience who don't want to go, and physically distanced venues. I don't think that doesn't add up to a great picture for that group. Carbon neutrality, I think it's a positive here. We'd have a real chance to increase the pace of the carbon agenda from a county that was already aligned to it. Broadband is essential. Digital divide has been massively increased. This is very clear in education. There are disadvantaged groups who've not been able to access the services. There's been people who've been trying to work from home who've not been able to get effective service. And as more services, both health and care, move digitalised, the broadband solution for Gloucestershire becomes extra important. And finally, the collaborative working is essential if we're going to together, and this ability to work from home is a real positive. Climate change, transportation, health and well-being. I will end it there, and apologies for taking a bit longer than I was meant to.
Let's make one final comment as well. I mean, clearly our approach in the LEP is to make sure that when we come on to suggesting interventions, that we're being evidence-led on that and using the data to tell us what the interventions are that we should be making. So that'll be our approach.
Patrick,
David.
it's worth coming in. Richard Lappington is watching the meeting on YouTube, and he's asked a question, and I think David will be able to answer this. It's about the growth hub in Mitcheldean at Vantage Point. Has that hope opened? He's just asked that question on YouTube.
It won't have physically opened. We had a planned opening date, which I can't remember off the top of my head, to be honest, pre-COVID. So it's well advanced and will open as soon as it can. But I can get the detailed information on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody got any more questions for Nick or David before we go to Lisa?
John McGinty.
Just a quick question. Will you be monitoring the ethnicity of the increased unemployment and the differential impacts?
We get the breakdown, John, from the unemployment data sheets that come through from GCC. So that has a full breakdown by age, ethnicity, and ward level as well. So we will be able to have a look at where the impact's hitting the hardest. The interesting thing about the first set of data is that the increase in unemployment was pretty much across the board even. But obviously, as Nick has said and as you pointed out, we all know that the biggest impact on unemployment always hits the youngest hardest, and those furthest from the workplace, and those on lower wages usually as well.
Thanks, John.
Steve Jordan.
Steve.
Sorry, I thought we were getting into the general debate, but I'll come back after that. The next presentation.
Any other questions, or should we go on to Lisa?
Oh, hang on, no, we've got Doina.
Oh, Doina.
I think mine was the same question. I think we've got another president. I had some comments, but on the whole thing. So then I'll hang on till you're finished.
Yeah, leave your hands up. Yeah, that's fine. Could you lower yours, John? Lower your hand. Is that all right? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to Lisa then to present her report, and then we'll come to open the questions and discussion after that. Lisa.
Great, thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa McCants, work for Shared Intelligence, and have been working to support Senior Officer Group. So there are two papers in front of you. One is the core report, which was produced specifically for the Joint Committee today, and it's supported by a paper that went to the Senior Officer Group, and that Senior Officer Group contributed to what's in front of you. So key points arising from the report. As previously mentioned, we don't know the extent of what's actually going to happen, but this paper begins to set out the principles of recovery and highlights the multi-layered approach that's being taken, and that's at a geographical, sector and timeframe perspective. Emerging from all of this work is a family of strategies. The districts, boroughs and city councils have been focusing on an immediate locality response and are individually and collectively building a recovery framework or action plan for the future. The LEP, as we just heard, is developing an overarching economic strategy, which builds from their recent local industrial strategy work, evidence base and sector analysis, as well as strong input from local business community. And the County Council has the strategic role to lead, facilitate and coordinate, and it's been working across partners to try and reduce any duplication or overlap where that's been possible to do so. The paper gives a flavour of the types of issues that have been raised by local employers, and this is mainly taken from districts, borough and the city through a series of conversations that we've had with them following the Senior Officer Group meeting. And I think it also gives a bit of an indication of some of the interlinked policies or strategies which will require further attention in the future. And I think that's particularly important to enable delivery in the short and medium term, to make sure that projects can still come forward, money is still being spent within the local economy, and it does create or sustain job outcomes. And I think that's really key in terms of that longer term resilience, sustainability, and trying to reduce as much of the decline as is possible. And the paper also sets out an initial set of activity that's required to enable a plan to be shaped across the county. And within that, it'll be ironing out any of those overlaps and making sure that roles and responsibilities are crystal clear. And then finally, in relation to the governance, which is towards the end of the paper, it's proposed that the senior officer group continues to be the officer body for the long-term economic recovery, with the joint committee as the member-led body overseeing. So all of these inputs going through into senior officer group to make sure all of those elements of growth, economic prosperity, well-being, etc., can be addressed. So I think there's probably two questions that I'd like to put to you today as part of your discussion that happens next. I think as we've heard, there's still a lot of information that's coming out. Positions will be unfolding on a weekly basis. And I think some of the ONS or other government data sources are getting more and more fluid as we're getting more and more data from businesses going forward. So I think the two areas for discussion today. The first is, do you agree with the principles that have been set out? So just to recap, a whole system approach that's built on learning, whether that's from some previous economic shocks, recessions, to the current position we're in now. This multi-layered approach that looks at sectors, geography and timeframes. I appreciate there are different timeframes being considered, but it's a slightly artificial point in this point in time. That the development of this family of strategies should be evidence-led and should also follow that long-term vision. So not forgetting all of the good work that's been happening and making sure that money can keep coming back into the economy. And I think some of those core areas we've heard, young people, clean growth, skills and employment, and some of the high value sectors, as well as the high volume of employee sectors. Enabling those growth projects to come forward and bringing any forward that it may be appropriate to do so. And then appreciating the wider lobbying role for some of those core issues, whether that's representing the self-employed, sole traders, SMEs, all the way up to the larger businesses. And then the second question is just in relation to the governance. So is the Joint Committee happy to confirm that the governance as set out in the paper is appropriate for managing this activity going forward?
So Patrick, we've got Steve Jordan and Doina Canal. We've also got Steve Mawson and Kevin Cromwell. So we've got a list of speakers now.
Well, we start with Steve, and then Simon. Perhaps you can bring in each speaker as they.
Yeah, and Rob Bird. Just
Robert. Yeah. Steve.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few sort of general points, if I may, and then some bits specifics while we go. Firstly, I entirely appreciate there's a huge amount of work been going on and will need to go on. I sort of thank everybody involved, because I think there's a huge amount of partnership work that has been going on, and as has been said, is essential to keep us going through this process. So that is much appreciated all around. And as I alluded to in the sort of under the previous paper, one of the things that I know we've been looking at is, of all the things we're doing up to now, how much should we carry on doing? Because you need to review as we go. And in our case, well, it's not much of a secret. The Golden Valley Cyber Central is key to the things we're doing. I think that's universally agreed. And we've absolutely been cracking on with that as quickly as we possibly can. And on that basis, I was slightly confused. When the report on page 43 of the overall pack talks about sectors emerging as high priority include, but then there's no reference to cyber. So I wasn't quite sure what definition of priority that was and how they'd emerged. That's something I think we'd be saying, but when we get through this, someone can maybe explain that. But generally speaking as well, so for instance, we've got a phase, again, working with County Council, a high street upgrade phase 2 that we're keen to get on with. I mean, our big risk there really is that we set aside £2 million to do that, which is Canberra and Strand in Cheltenham, which I think again is essential. But the way the funding is going, we're not quite sure whether that money will still be there by the time we get to wish to spend it. So clearly, local government funding is a key element of all this, and what I know we're all keen, sure, to be out there leading on this, but how we're able to get through it based on our own local funding is obviously going to be essential to understand. And the other key thing that we kept going through this is the affordable housing projects wherever we can. So I think one of the emphasise the lesson, really, the importance of affordable housing that we're all aware of, and trying to progress those projects. But in addition to that, we've only been looking at new work and what has now emerged over and above what we're doing anyway. So we've had those three sort of priority areas existing, which we carried on with. We've, as part of that, we published a sort of recovery strategy locally for consultation last month, and we're going to sort of hopefully get any input and then tie that down a bit more specifically next month. But again, it's the sort of thing we're all looking at, no doubt. Again, homelessness has been emphasised. We know we've got people who've emerged as homeless. So some were already rough sleeping, but are now others who weren't rough sleeping but have emerged as homeless through this process. We're currently housing in hotels. We need to be looking at how we deal with them as an urgent priority. And also, again, working with county and BID and colleagues, as has been referenced, the concern of retailers is not how they manage their shop, but how we manage the streets outside, outside their shop when people do return to the high streets. And that work is literally going on at the moment, obviously ahead of shops opening more broadly, I expect, on the 15th of June, which is the current plan. So all that is going on as we speak. And this emphasises one of the things I do think I was going to raise, really, because I think I broadly agree with the thrust of what is being proposed in the papers. The issue is going to be how on earth we resource those sort of medium-term aspirations against the immediate urgent stuff we're all doing, rushing around to try and sort out as we speak. And it's trying to find those resources that are going to be stable enough or available enough to actually do the work that's needed. And that obviously hasn't been added at this stage, but clearly that is going to be part of this thinking process as we go forward to the next stage, no doubt. And one of the other thing I want to touch on really is the national versus local, because for me, and I think for all of us on the call, we no doubt think that the local work we're doing is going to be essential to get, because everywhere is slightly different, everyone has different issues to tackle. And it was mentioned in passing that in Cheltenham's case, after a mini sort of consultation, we were about to announce the broadening of the opening hours on construction sites, for instance, a couple of weeks ago. Literally on the same day we were about to announce that, Robert Jenrick got up and announced something different from national government as to what they wanted us to be doing. So we thought, oh, blimey, we better hold that then. So we then held that for a few days while we understood what he said. And in the end, we've gone back to what we were proposing in the first place. But the national local, the slight random, with the best of will in the world, there's a slight randomness of some of the announcements at the moment, which in some ways counter what we've been trying to do locally rather than support it. So going forward, that communication on what's happening when and where we add value and where someone else is dealing with it is going to be essential. Otherwise, we'll get, we'll carry on with duplication, which is at risk happening at the moment. And as again, as we mentioned, I entirely support that during removing the duplication, so we minimise the waste of time, that we're all doing something useful. So I broadly support that with those sort of provisos, which no doubt will be part of the thinking process going forward. Chair, thank you.
Steve, lots of very interesting points there. I think are we getting
Joiner.
time? I just wonder what the time aspect is.
So you're 10 to 12, Patrick.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So Doiner's next.
Doiner.
Yeah, I've got a few comments, so I'll try to keep them brief. I know we've running out of time now. Yes, so we've been asked to agree the principles. So I just had a few comments, and just to sort of a quick update what we're doing as the district council. We have got a draft strategy, and we're looking to work in a really collaborative way around our own recovery plans. A couple of points I'd like to make. I'm a bit concerned about how district council's role has been defined in this paper. We're referred to as local councils. I presume that just lumps us all together with possibly town councils as well. There's a clear definition here of the county council having a strategic role to play. But I think we have to recognise that districts have also got an extremely important local strategic role to play. And I think if any of you have been on the district council network calls, who during this period of emergency have been a fantastic network and support for us as district councils, and have been really good at being our voice back to government as well, I think they would tell you, and that goes across all parties, that districts have got an absolutely crucial role to play in the economic recovery. So I feel that ought to be a little bit reflected in this document, and don't just call us local councils working on local things. We've got a very important strategic contribution to make as well. So I think if we've taken anything away from this emergency, and I hope you'll take this not as necessarily as a political point, over centralisation doesn't necessarily work. We're seeing it's really good to see, like the track and trace, now they're stepping up the local role. So I think it has to be, we're saying it's collaborative, it has to be truly collaborative, and I think districts are equal partners in this. I'm a little bit concerned, it looks a bit hierarchical to me that the county are taking the strategic lead And I think districts have got an important role to play in that. And so at the end, where it says about the governance, the final paragraph, this group could involve districts, borough and city. I think it absolutely must involve the districts, because otherwise it's not going to work, because you won't get that grassroots buy-in. And I think possibly as well, an acknowledgement of some of our larger towns may play quite an important role as well. I'm seeing Stroud Town has put some really interesting thought into what they do on their sort of safe return to work. So that's one point I wanted to make. The other point was around, I really support the short, medium and long-term structure, the way you've done that. I just wondered if, and I think that echoes what Steve was saying, if really thinking through the short term, I think we've referenced the fact that safe returns, safe spaces, use of public spaces is going to be really crucial in the next couple of months, and how we communicate that out. And obviously there's this EU funding that's been made available to councils, so possibly we need to reflect that in there, and we've got some criteria that have come out of that. I saw that there was this sort of review of the county assets, which has been put into the medium term, and I wonder if that needs to be put earlier on. And I think possibly we also need to incorporate a review of the district assets. For example, you know, are we looking at how we use our car parking space potentially as a sort of way that if we've got to have extra space for businesses, you know, hospitality, should we be looking at how we use public spaces to enable the space there? I was speaking to someone from Belgium. That's what they're doing. They're reopening cafes and restaurants. So I wonder if that's something we could look at, because I think that's really important. And the final point I wanted to make has been raised around the question of climate change and carbon neutral. It seems to me, and you know, there may be reasons for that, but aerospace and aviation seem to be put at the top of the most important sector. And I would just sort of challenge that. I'm just a bit concerned that climate change, and this document seems to be added on as the last word at the end of the thing. And I think it should be put much more high profile, because I'm not sure whether the aerospace industry is going to remain as it is. I know it's got massive challenges, but is that really where as a county that's going to be our top priority? And sort of linked to the sort of where you've identified the high priority sectors, I know that agriculture is extremely important, but as a percentage of the county business, I wonder if that is the key one. And although we've said visitor economy, retail and high streets, have we really factored in hospitality and the cultural element of that? I just think going forwards, potentially hospitality in its wider sense, hotels, events, you know, that weddings, pubs, really, I wonder if they're going to be the ones most severely hit and the last to recover. So I wonder if that's really reflected. I think you've touched on culture as well. How on earth are we going to see concerts and or small scale cultural events going forward? So I just wonder, they may not necessarily be the largest element, but they could potentially be the ones that take the longest to come back. And I think disproportionately could have the most damaging effect in our local communities. If we can't see pubs and cafes, restaurants and hotels opening and in the longer term, then that could be quite difficult. So I think those are the sort of 3 points I wanted to make, and I don't know if that's something we could take away and look at. I don't quite know where this paper's going next, or whether it's going to come back to us for a discussion. I think someone made the point is this committee perhaps have an earlier meeting than September. Perhaps that's an ask that we could take away. I do think we're still in the emergency, aren't we? And I think we'd appreciate a chance to have a further discussion on all of this. I think particularly as the district's plans themselves are starting to emerge now. And I will certainly be engaging separately with the LEP around some of the work that we're doing on that. That's all the points I want to make, but hopefully we can take those away and think about them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah, you make some excellent points there. I think it's important to note that this is the start of the process, and it is going to be very collaborative across in all of Gloucestershire. If we're going to do this successfully, we need to do this together. We will come on to future meetings. I think we will look at a date in July where the officer group can take away the comments today and look at how that can be reflected in the document. I think Kevin may come in a minute now and talk a little bit about doing some scrutiny as well in the meantime. But certainly this is going to be an organic process, an organic document, and we need to work together to get through this. Mike, did you want to come in at all at this point?
No, not necessarily. You've covered most of the things that I would have said, Chair. I'm happy for the members in the time left to make their comments.
So, Patrick, we've got Steve Mawson.
Steve Mawson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points, just to make sure everybody's aware. So I currently chair the LRF recovery group, which is not around economic recovery. It is around partner working to help the organisations come back on speed. And I do think I've been very impressed with all the partners across the public sector who've been working together to bring the speed back on. There's a couple of cross references particularly around the reopening town centres safely, and as Mike made reference to earlier, the highways work that's been ongoing to link that stuff together. So I think that's been really popular, and we have been trying to make sure we aren't driving the economic work whilst at the same time trying to link in with that carefully. Kind of with my other hat on, and thanks for the presentations from Nick and Lisa. I think what we've stumbled on here is the complexity of the solutions to put in place. I'm really nervous about trying to, what I've been loosely calling a dash for cash, to try and make sure, where can we put our resource? Where should we put our activity best? Clearly, the work that needs to go on needs a slowly developed progress, so that we don't think, right, let's stick some money into that activity or stick some money into this activity. However, I do think we will need to put some money into something fairly soon. So I'm totally supportive of the work that's been going on, and I think we will need to set aside some additional resources, probably from the SERIF fund, as we move forward.
Steve, I think we've got Kevin next. Is that right, Simon?
Kevin did have his hand up. Did you want to speak, Kevin?
Leave it till the end. I'll leave the other members to have a word first.
So it's Rob Bird.
Rob Bird.
Thank you, everybody. Gosh, where to start with such a complicated topic? I'm not clear what our objective is here to start with. As a committee, and I go back to the bit about governance procedures at the start. To do anything it considers likely to achieve the promotion or improvement of the economic well-being of the area of Gloucestershire. Fine. Do I agree with the principles set out? I'm not so sure. I'm not sure what principles are being set out here. Do I agree with the governance as set out? I don't. I see that as being very confusing and complicated, and doesn't really represent the role that districts have in economic planning and development in our areas. And I'm quite concerned about the way that is set out. It touches on comments already made by Steve and Doina. And to be honest, that chart looks to be rather top-down, overly complicated, based on committees and groups, rather than a simple understanding of the way supporting to go back to the quote at the start, to supporting the economic well-being of our area is concerned. And I think, as an idea, I would rather like to see something which sets out, at the moment we have different bodies with different roles. We have the districts taking on the role of their local economies. We have GFirst taking on the role of promoting the needs of businesses in this area, and then we have the county taking on the role of providing the infrastructure which helps to deliver those things. And I'd like to see something which reflects that. And therefore, how does this committee, if you like, fit in with that? And probably in the middle of those three other different bodies would help us to understand better what we're trying to achieve. As far as various approaches is concerned, there's been a lot of talk about sectors, but that seems to talk. I mean, some of the comments earlier on, I think, Doina mentioned, for example, aerospace. Who knows what's going to happen with aerospace? It's very important to us at the moment. It's facing a difficult time, as is agriculture. I'm not sure. We've traditionally looked at economies in terms of sectors. It's been the way we've done it. Is that now, bearing in mind what we're faced with, the way to be looking at these things in sectors? In any of those sectors that we've talked about, there are people who are currently doing very nicely, and there are others who are in the proverbial brown stuff. And so, is that the way to approach it? I won't mention his name because he might want to promote it later. But somebody in this group came up with an idea about well, actually, perhaps we should be considering how, in terms of supporting businesses and supporting business activity, a kind of a definition more based on their circumstances in relation to what has just happened. In other words, a kind of rather than a business sector basis, but a business effect basis, because Steve Mawson just talked about funding, and I guess there's a conversation, because it has been talked about in a wider sense, about, well, can we provide some funding to support businesses? But the question is, where would you direct it? And you could pick any sector and say, well, that sector needs help, that sector needs help. But within those sectors, you've got some people who are still actually doing all right, and others that are not. So maybe we should be thinking about business categorization, shall we say, in a different way. So those are just some comments, really. I was just thinking what other people have said, and about if there was anything else in there. But I think, Doina said she supports the short, medium, long-term approach, and that's a very, a very sensible categorization. But as far as how can we actually assist the local economy, the economic well-being, I don't think we can do it based on a sector analysis. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Mike, do you want to comment on Rob's comment? Sorry, Rob's point.
Always nice, Chairman, for you to invite me to comment on my leaders. And I think all the comments are really helpful. I mean, this is the first time I think we've had this kind of discussion, Chair. So we're not going to get hard and fast outcomes from this today. It has helped. I thought Nick's presentation is really helpful in actually just understanding the issues facing business. And I think in terms of the structure and Lisa's report, that was really, you're not adopting anything in terms of the report today. That was really a report to help facilitate the discussion. And clearly people will agree with elements of it and not agree with elements of it. And it's such a complicated area, everybody will have a different view. So I've been merrily listening to what members have said, and I think officers will take this away, and we will try and work things up to the next stages. I think the issues for me, though, there was something that Lisa was saying, not necessarily about the structure, about the principle of the committee, this joint committee, as we go forward, being the focus of the local authority coordination and collaboration. And if there was a kind of in principle decision to say, yes, that's okay, we're all generally supportive of that, then we can all then work through the committee in that basis. And of course, I mean, that is a collaborative approach. There are 6 districts. There's one county council. It's majority voting. That will pick up Doina's point about the profile of the districts within these discussions. The LEP are engaged there. It's an opportunity to do that. The structure we can take away and work on. I wouldn't worry too much about that. The senior, if it is, we're going to work through this committee, then we will automatically work through the senior officer group and the chief executives. That's not a problem. But there's so much information we've spoken about today. I think I've just been happy to listen, and maybe hopefully members have picked up quite a bit from the LEP presentation and some of the discussions about how complicated this is. Absolutely right to take a layered approach. Doina's comments about the importance of the district councils for their place approach, we can reflect as we go forward, and that will happen anyway, because the district councils will have their plans and they will want to implement them. The key thing is we work together and implement them in where that makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
So Patrick, you've got Colin. Colin, you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I was only going to make a couple of comments. We did give some thought, a group of us, in fact, SOG, with Lisa there at the time, which is helping to inform her paper. And there was a number of options we looked at in terms of how do we best get a collective viewpoint and a group together that represents GEGJC and give us a direct link in going forward. And we came to the conclusion, the group of us on that meeting, that SOG was probably the best way to do it. I mean, I was actually just about to set up a meeting myself, which was a sort of county district meeting. There are other meetings that are already started to be formed by the LEP. And we felt the SOG was absolutely perfect because, it's got a high level representation from each of the districts and the county and the LEP already there. It does not duplicate anything that already exists, or we're not trying to duplicate something because it's already naturally there and has been working for some time. So it has a certain confidence base to it. It has a direct feed in to GEGJC, so therefore the decisions from SOG go straight into GEGJC to move forward. And it has a direct link through the senior officers back into the, with both myself and Mike, straight back into the chief exec's meeting as well. So we felt that already, rather than rebuild something or start something from afresh, it was best to start with something that was already there and functioning with a direct link back into GEGJC. The other thing, just from picking up Rob's point, you almost answer your own question, Rob, in many respects, because the difficulty is that we don't know what we're recovering from at the moment. We don't know who has failed because effectively it's masked completely by furlough and the response from the government ploughing money into the businesses. So until that falls over, some of those start to fall over. You don't even know what some of the problems are. You can guess, but you don't know for certain. And therefore, for the moment, the best way forward to get the evidence base to know where we need to start to apply and look is from a sectoral geographical basis, because that gives us a much more rounded viewpoint. And I don't think any one of us are ever going to have the resources, either financial or staff, to be able to support each business that may have a bit of a problem or may look good or bad or whatever, may on transitional arrangements. And the best way we felt, and the evidence would suggest previously where the country's been in this situation, sectoral geographical support is the best way to go, because what you do is raise the platform up for everyone in that sector and enable all companies then try and succeed from that sector or geographical base, rather than trying to pick the winners and losers, which is almost impossible to do, particularly at this moment in time. And it is, and I know it's very frustrating for members probably, they want to be seen to do something straight away. That economic recovery is a slow burn fuse. You can't do it overnight. You've got, it's going to be months before we even know what we're trying to recover from economically. And then it's about putting those plans in place to help those sectors and those geographical areas to try and do that. And that's the real difficulty. At the moment, so many of the issues and problems are masked and we can only just guess. And that's what the paper's trying to reflect, is a way forward, that short, medium and term, knowing where we are at the moment and how we need to gather that evidence base to go forward, working obviously collectively right across the board.
Colin, and thank you, Mike, as well for before. Do we have anybody else who wants to make a comment or question before we come to Kevin? Simon, is there anybody there?
Patrick, can I come back at some, please?
Was that Rob?
Rob Bird, yeah.
Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Colin, for what you've just said. Much appreciated. And I just, you referenced me and what I said, and very specifically, I'm firmly of the belief that, as you said, we cannot pick winners and losers. And the point is, we are only a small part of all this. And we will have, if we choose to, some finance available. And we will get to a point of saying, where do we use that finance? And I think that's what I was really trying to say. I take the point. We cannot predict at the moment. The question is, in the future, within all the businesses that are around in our part of the world, which are the ones that we can perhaps help, which are likely to survive if with some help. And maybe that's what I was getting at, saying that's the kind of categorization that we need to think about for how we use our limited resources in the future, rather than saying we need to focus on aerospace or agriculture. That was all. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, Rob. I think we've taken that on board. And bear in mind, this is the start of a process. And the officers will take this away and we will come back so we can develop and refine our approach. And certainly bear in mind that the landscape is changing as well. So we're going to have to be quite flexible in terms of how things go and what happens. Is there anybody else, Simon, before we go to
Kevin?
Kevin
Cromwell.
Do you want to come in, Kevin?
Yeah, thanks for that. I'd like to first of all thank the opportunity of us being able to ask questions and the officers for answering some of those questions from the scrutiny members. I hope that several of the scrutiny members are actually on the YouTube at the moment and are watching this meeting. I did sort of pencil a few questions in to ask the committee really on how you think you can do, because we are back at the beginning almost of this. We thought we had a way forward and something's come along and totally changed that way forward almost. So I suppose my questions really are one is how are you, the committee, going to involve the scrutiny committee in this recovery process, i.e., you've said today, or Mike has said today, about the fact that there's been discussions and you want to listen to those discussions. The scrutiny committee is made up of district as well as county members, so therefore, they will have, you will have a greater discussion, and therefore that can input into it. So that's my first question. The second one is, how will the scrutiny committee be kept informed of work that's been undertaken by the joint committee and the G1st LEP? Because at the moment, we haven't had an awful lot of information on anything that's been going on. We've heard today on several meetings that have happened or several discussions that have happened, but obviously, unless the scrutiny committee know about what's going on, how on earth do we scrutinise that? So how are you going to be able to feed that information to us? And then and then with all that in mind, what contribution can the scrutiny committee make to the recovery process? How are you going to take on board what we do say and how we do say it? Because like I said, we are made up of, as Doina said, she wants to make sure that districts are involved. Well, the scrutiny committee is district and it is county. So it is a committee that is made up of all of those concerned parties. And, they are members and members want to feed into this. So really, it's a question of that, so that then we can move forward, putting our agenda together for, towards the end of this month with the information. I mean, for instance, today we've had slides. Is there any way that the scrutiny committee can see a copy of those slides, for instance? Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, I think scrutiny is a vital and a very important part of any democratic process, and there will be a role there. I think the key thing is for you guys to have a meeting. The documents and the papers and the presentations today will be available. It is viewable. You can review it over and over again on YouTube, I would think, which would be exciting. I think it's something we need to chat about, how we coordinate all these things. But I think there's definitely a role for scrutiny. And I think you do need a meeting sooner than later for yourselves would be good. And I think, to be honest, we're all kind of scrutinising this process from all levels. So that's the role. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments at this stage? No. Well, this item was just to note, but I think we have been asked to at least agree the general principles of the governance, and that this is a good committee to sort of see this through, as we are connected with all the districts, the LEP, etc., and that the senior officer group are the body that coordinates the work below that. So there is that connection directly with the districts as well. And the other thing is for us to agree to have another meeting in July to pick up an update following this meeting and the start of the process and see where it's developed. Are we all content with those two items, you want to just go around, Simon?
Yes, I can go round. There's no comments from senior officers on that proposal, is there? In terms of, I'm just thinking of Mike and Colin, anything they wanted to say before I go round?
Not a huge amount. Thank you, Chair. I think in terms of the comments that are being made, it'd be good to have the steer that you're about to seek. And I would certainly support the committee coming back in July for a further discussion. By that time, I think the various elements of our that make up the committee will have made progress with their plans. So we will have more detail to discuss, and then we can work out how we go about coordinating that. In terms of the comments from Kevin, I think the very good comments. I think I'd like to think about that. We're at a very early stage. There's a lot of people starting to think about how we can plan. There's lots of people thinking about how we can plan. There's a potential danger that we have too many people trying to make a plan, and we need to coordinate that. But nevertheless, I think the scrutiny role is important, and I think it would be helpful to work out how we deal with that. And certainly, I think in terms of monitoring the effect of some of our plans, and acting as of looking to monitor maybe around some of the let work and how we knit our plans together. The committee, the scrutiny committee, can have a really important role there to keep an eye on how that's going. So can we take that away, and we'll give that some thought at officer level. I don't think I need to say any more at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Anything from you, Colin? No, fine. Okay, so I'll go to the vote then, Chair.
Can I interrupt a second, Simon? Sorry, I'm not sure what we're voting on here, and if it is indeed a vote, can you just be clear?
It's just an agreement to go forward with the project as it stands. The governance element is that this sits with this committee, and the officer group is the officers that work with it. That's the key point of today, and the start of the process. And the other issue is just to have a July meeting, which isn't in the diary.
So what you're saying, Patrick, is the senior officer group is developing the detail of the proposals, and that will come back to the committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's owned by this committee, effectively.
Yeah.
You okay with that, Rob?
Well, let's be quite clear then. So when you say the proposals, this is what you're saying is that we are approving that this committee owns and approves work on an economic recovery plan. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes, but we've got a document in front of us which outlines the start of a process, and we're just saying that this committee seems to be the good place for that work to continue and to come back to.
You know, if it's merely a very general point of saying yes, it would be appropriate for this committee to engage in such work and to develop plans accordingly, and then obviously the senior officer group is the sensible working function of this to deliver on that. Absolutely, but I just it's a question of it's that word, you know, this committee owning, that I didn't quite understand in what you're saying. If you're just saying, well, that's fine, we ought to have we ought to do some work on this to produce from the point of view of this committee, and going back to that statement about what its purpose is, what this committee's purpose is, if we're saying yes, in the light of that purpose, we think it's appropriate to have a recovery plan and do some work on it, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, I think that's agreement then. Yeah.
So what we're saying then, just for the benefit of members, is that the committee will take the lead on the recovery plan, and will request the senior officer group to do some more detailed work, and that will come back to the next meeting, which will be held in July. So that's what we're voting on, yeah?
Chair, can I comment, please?
Yeah, Mike.
I wasn't necessarily thinking that we were agreeing to definitely at this point have an economic recovery plan solely hosted by the committee. We're no way are taking away any recovery planning responsibilities that fits with any of the organisations around the table. What I was looking for was the principle that the joint committee would be the forum whereby we would come together to discuss and collaborate over economic recovery planning for the county, bringing together all the recovery plans that are around the county, be it at districts, at the county council levels, or at the LEP. But we would in principle agree to work together from that collaborative process. If through that collaborative process we feel at some point, the committee feels that it wants to have a single overarching plan, then we can agree to that when we get there. But this morning, I think all we were looking for was the principle that we would work through the joint committee to collaborate and coordinate all our efforts from the local authority family in Gloucestershire together with the LEP to make sense of how we go forward. There's a great potential for us to duplicate or miss things. So that was really all it was. And then effectively the senior officer group from the officer perspective will be the focus of how we support that work, Chair. I don't know that we were actually formally agreeing to develop a county-wide economic recovery plan this morning. But if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But I think this was more about using the joint committee in principle as a coordinating body rather than invent another one, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for putting some absolute clarity to that. Yes, this is not to the exclusion of anything else, and it's not. Ownership is probably the wrong word for me to use in the first place. It was just the fact that this is the start of the process, and this seems to be the good committee, or a good committee for this particular part of the process to continue with. So,
right.
That is Mike.
Okay, Patrick, so we can then go to the vote. So for, against or abstain. Councillor Tony Dale.
Yes, for, thank you.
Steve Jordan.
For.
Richard Cook.
For.
Joyner Canal.
For.
And who? Rob Bird. Sorry, Rob.
Rob, that's for.
And then you, Patrick, as chair.
Yeah, for.
Okay, so six in favour.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. It's only a couple of things to wrap up. First of all, future meetings. We've already got 16th of September and 18th of November in, and we will now look for a date in July, which officers will come back to us on. It's not an additional meeting because, of course, our March meeting was cancelled anyway, so we're kind of still in the same flow. And the only last thing is to note the committee work plan, and if there are any items for consideration for future meetings. But you're always very welcome to send those through anyway. Anybody got any comments, any issues? No. On that basis, it's just for me to thank you all for coming along to this meeting this morning. Thank everybody on YouTube for watching it. And we've got some exciting times ahead of us. It'll be difficult times. And I think the key is that we do all work together in a collaborative manner so that we make sure that Gloucestershire as a whole can come out of this in the best way that's possible. And I wish everybody good luck in trying to make that happen and bring that forward. Thank you all once again for coming along, and I'll declare the meeting closed.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, thanks, Patrick. So could everybody log off so we can end the YouTube?